Good morning. Happy Sunday. A lot of people wanted me to review the video of James Freeman's arrest. He was arrested on November 28th. And instead, I'm going to review Earl's review of James's arrest. So we're going to start off. I love the fish tank. I mean, it's not a real fish tank. It's just a screen he has behind him, but still, absolutely love it. Good choice. So he says, first of all, that James Freeman was charged with felony assault on a police officer. And now I did not see any assault. But let's see why James Freeman could have been charged with felony assault on a police officer. Aggravated assault, felony assault. A person commits aggravated assault if the person commits assault as described by section 13-1203. Let's jump there real quick. 13-1203, a person commits assault by knowingly touching another person with the intent to injure, insult, or provoke such a person. Basically, it's injurious or offensive touching. If somebody finds it offensive, it's going to be assault. Don't touch people if they're going to be insulted by you touching them, if they find it offensive. Basically anything can be assault, especially if the person doesn't like you and they're hostile to you, i.e. a cop who is trying to get you out of his crime scene. So a person commits aggravated assault if the person commits assault as defined by offensive touching under any of the following circumstances. Section 8. If the person commits the assault knowing or having reason to know the victim is any of the following. A peace officer, or person summoned and directed by the officer. So it is super duper easy if you touch an officer to get charged with felony assault. Now, will it stick? I don't know. Is there a defense? Sure, there's a defense. There's a justification of self-defense. However, the only justification is to resist an officer. The threat of physical force is not justified, threat or use is not justified to resist an arrest the person knows or should know is being made by a peace officer, whether the arrest is lawful or unlawful, unless the physical force used by the peace officer exceeds that allowed by law, or if the person provoked the other's attempted use of unlawful force, unless the person withdraws or nevertheless continues. So the only real exception is if the peace officer exceeds that, if they're using unreasonable force, if they're using excessive force. And I don't know if they did. I don't know when. So I watched the video. I never actually
Leave me alone! Don't touch me! Don't touch me! Get your fucking hands off of me! Get your hands off of me!
You hear that snap? That might have been him slapping the officer's hand away or something along those lines.
Fucking hands off of me! Get your hands off!
That snap. Get your fucking hands off me. Snap. But I don't know. It could have been while they were laying on the ground. I don't know. So, let's move on from there. So resisting arrest. Good Lord, everything is resisting arrest. A person commits resisting arrest by intentionally preventing or attempting to prevent a person reasonably known to him to be a police officer acting under the color of such peace officer's official authority from effecting arrest by engaging in passive resistance. Just about anything, because you got to remember, passive resistance means a nonviolent physical act or failure to act that is intended to impede, hinder, or delay the effecting of arrest. Stiffening your arm to prevent someone from putting the cuffs on it, hanging onto your camera that would prevent the officer from, moving your arm behind your back and putting the cuff on it or something. All sorts of things can be passive resistance, and all sorts of things can be resisting arrest. So, yeah. The other charge was refusing to obey a lawful order. There is no charge that I'm aware of. There's no crime for resisting a lawful order in Arizona. Now, there is There is failure to comply with a police officer. A person shall not willfully fail or refuse to comply with any lawful order or direction of a police officer invested by law with the authority to direct, control, or regulate traffic. Now, all police officers in Arizona, to the best of my knowledge, are invested by law with the authority to direct, control, or regulate traffic. I could be wrong on that. But here's something else you might want to notice. This is in Chapter 28. That's why it's 28-622. You might notice all the others are 13, 13, 13, 13, 13, 13, 13. A lot of 13s there, huh? So 13 is crimes. 28 is transportation. So maybe this will apply. Now, there is some case law on it. It's not definitive case law by any stretch of the imagination. And federal courts have, in a different case that I don't have up, have stated that, yeah, Arizona, who knows which way Arizona is going to go on this one. There's State v. Gonzalez. It lists the elements of the crime. So if all of these elements are satisfied, then someone can be convicted of violating 28-622. You got to be a person. You have to willfully fail or refuse to comply. So you have to fail to comply or refuse to comply with any lawful order or direction. So lawful order or lawful direction of a police officer invested by law with the authority to direct, control, or regulate traffic. So James Freeman is a person. He failed or refused to comply, and he did so willfully. He willfully refused to comply with a lawful order. Yeah, they can control their crime scene or direction of a police officer. He stated that they were, what do they call that? Arizona State Troopers. I don't know what they call them. So anyway, there you go. It might apply. Now, again, does it only apply to traffic stops? I don't know. There's also State v. Burke that is looking at the same law. Ultimately, when ARS 28-622A is interpreted in accordance with the plain and ordinary meaning of its terms, it requires the individual to comply with the police officer's instructions that are, at the time they are issued, authorized by law. Because we believe this meaning would be evident to a person of reasonable intelligence, we find the term lawful order to be constitutional as written. Now, they do provide a couple examples in this. You can see step out of the car with your hands up. Well, obviously that's in relation to a car. Or to a person exiting the vehicle, put down your weapon. Now, once they're out of the vehicle, if they fail to comply, then is 28-622, how many steps away from the car do they have to take before they can no longer be charged with 28-622 for failing to put down their weapon when ordered? You know what I mean? Like if the officer sees they have a weapon when they're getting out of when their butt's still in the car and their feet are just hitting the asphalt of the road, is it a violation if they fail to comply with his orders? If he says at that point, put down the weapon, what if he doesn't see it until they're 2 steps away from the door? They've already taken 2 steps, and then he sees they have a weapon, and then he says, put down your weapon. If they fail to comply, then does 28-622 still apply? What if they've walked off the side of the road into a little rest area, and then the officer sees that the person's armed and says, put down your weapon, and the person fails to comply with the order? How far away from the car can you get? So these are leading me to believe that 28-622 does apply beyond a traffic stop. But like I said, it isn't clear. It certainly isn't clear. Next fun thing was the 10 feet away from the officer, 10 feet. And then Earl doesn't know where 10 feet came from. Well, that's pretty easy. It came from Glick v. Cuniff. And in Glick v. Cuniff, Glick was 10 feet away. 10 feet. Glick stopped roughly 10 feet away and began recording video footage of the arrest on his cell phone. Now, the the court here states that he was comfortably removed. He was comfortably removed from the officers. The complaint indicates that Glick filmed the officers from a comfortable remove and neither spoke to nor molested them in any way. Now, that's what the complaint indicates. You have to remember this. Well, okay, so what Glick is saying is that the complaint said that Glick was a good enough distance away from the officers. That's what the complaint says. That's what the complaint in Glick's case stated. And I also want to point out that this particular opinion limits itself to whether or not the officers had qualified immunity, whether the rights were clearly defined at the time. So that's all they're looking at. They're not making any judgments as to the distance. This is a First Circuit Court of Appeals case, so it does not apply to New York. That'll be useful in a minute. And it does not establish a bright line rule of how far you can be from the officer before they can no longer say you have to move back. There is no case that says that. It's always going to be factually driven. And for any person who says otherwise, you're being ridiculous. So Earl does say there is no case law, but he believes there is a circuit court decision that applies to New York City. That would be the Second Circuit Court of Appeals. The Second Circuit has not made any rulings about the right to film police in public, at least not at the Court of Appeals level, not at the circuit court level. And New York doesn't have a circuit court. They have a billion other kinds of courts. They have Supreme Courts and county courts and city courts and the Court of Appeals and the appellate division of the Supreme Court. I mean, they have all sorts of courts, but they don't have a circuit court. So I don't know what he's talking about with this particular ruling. Now, I'm not going to go through everything he has to say here, but he is right that officers do have the right to control the crime scene, the perimeter. They do have that right, even in Arizona. I know in the video, James thinks that the only way that officers can get him is if he uses actual physical force to interfere. I think he was talking about this. Yeah, this one. By using or threatening to use violence or physical force, the person knowingly obstructs, impairs, or hinders the performance of a government function by a public servant acting under color of his official authority, or the enforcement of penal law, or the preservation of the peace by a peace officer acting under color of his official authority. So he is right that he would actually have to use physical force, violence, or threats of violence or physical force to be charged with and convicted of obstructing government operations. But there are a few other laws that may come into play. Obstructing criminal investigations. If they delay the communication of information through intimidation of a peace officer. So, and the reason why I bring intimidation up is because James likes to yell. He's not a very intimidating man, but he escalates from 0 to 10 like instantly and just starts bellowing orders and things like that at the officers. So that may come into play. I don't know if he's been charged with this at all. Again, I'm going just by what Earl said, and I don't know. Another thing that they can potentially charge him on is a person commits a criminal trespass in the third degree if he knowingly enters or remains unlawfully on any real property after a reasonable request to leave by a law enforcement officer, the owner or other person having lawful control over such property or reasonable notice prohibiting entry. Now, you're going to say, well, it's a street, it's public property. Yes, but it is real property. And if the officer has lawful control over the property and he makes a reasonable request for you to leave, then you may. I mean, I haven't dug into this one. I'm just saying that this may be something that a prosecutor might throw at some point in time. But that being said, the cops are going to find a way, the courts are going to find a way to allow the officers to control crime scenes. And then the last thing there's two other things. Okay, he does bring up time, place, and manner restrictions. Here you go. They can put time, manner, and place restrictions, he says. Meaning that if you're too close to a crime scene, they can relocate you. Well, the ability to control a crime scene is independent of your First Amendment rights. It would, if a law or regulation interferes with First Amendment rights as kind of a byproduct, not a direct intent of the law or regulation, but if it has an incidental impairment of your First Amendment rights, then there's a different test that's used. It's the Usv O'Brien Test. Basically, the government has to have a significant right, and their regulation of that right has to only incidentally impair the First Amendment rights, and it can't impair the First Amendment rights any more than necessary to effectuate that significant government interest. I may be misstating it because I haven't looked it up for purposes of this because it's not really important. But if you were going to try to do a First Amendment analysis of their ability to control their crime scene, that's what you would look at. Where the time, place, and manner restriction comes into play is if the government is actually specifically trying to control or regulate your First Amendment right. And that has to be a reasonable time, place, or manner restriction. So it's got to be reasonable. And if in order for it to be reasonable, there has to be a significant or important government interest. The time, place, or manner restriction has to be narrowly tailored to achieve that significant or important government interest, and they have to leave open ample alternative channels for communication. So if the officer is just saying, you need to get out of our crime scene, or you need to get out of the perimeter, and they're enforcing it for everybody, not just for a person with a camera, then you wouldn't look at a time, place, or manner restriction. You just say, well, the government can do this. Because, obviously the government has a significant interest in controlling crime scenes and perimeters because you don't know what's going on there. There could be a bomb in the car. You don't know, right? We went through this, Arizona's Ninth Circuit. We went through this with American News and Information Services plus J.C. Playford versus Gore et al. And, J.C. Playford tried to waltz into places where there were crime scenes, they were restricted areas, they had perimeter set up. He tried to waltz in claiming he was press and he could get within 10 feet, and he got arrested and he got charged, he got convicted, and then they sued in federal court, and the federal court said, no, sorry, that's not a First Amendment right. You don't have a right to go in there. Police do have the right to control their crime scenes. And the officer says, I need you to back up for officer safety. You're going to have to do it. Maybe that would depend on the state. I think the last thing I really want to talk about is he says that there's a lot of, in the California crew, there are government agents, government infiltrators. Again, that's really stupid. You got to remember that Freeman filmed his crime. If he committed any crimes. I'm not saying he did, because honestly, I don't know if he did. I didn't see him assault an officer. Maybe on the obstructing, maybe, but remember, does it apply to someone filming a traffic incident? Resisting arrest is, if the felony assault and the obstruction aren't legit, then the resisting arrest aren't legit. So I don't even need to address that. But you got to remember that I don't know why he wants to make it seem like the government has to go out of its way to control these guys. They don't. I mean, he made it unlisted. It was up for like 2 days, 3 days. It's crazy talk. I mean, if anybody would know whether or not government was infiltrating you guys, I would know. Thanks for watching. Have a great day.